Hello and welcome back to In the Field, a live stream series from Fujifilm, South Africa. As you know, my name is Paul Choy, and every week I'm joined by a different guest from around the world as we explore a behind the scenes look at their photography, and they share some of their tips and their tricks with us. And this week we are going all the way to South Korea, where I'm joined by fabulous photographer Dylan Goldby. Dylan, welcome.
Paul, good morning.
It is good morning, isn't it? Because it's silly o'clock for you. What time is it there?
It's 2 a.m. at the moment.
That is a ridiculous time to be up, but thank you so much for joining us at this time in the morning to share some of your tips and your tricks and your secrets with us.
All right, thanks for having me.
And as always, everybody that's watching live, do share your questions and your comments, and I'll put them to Dylan. And if you're watching this later, of course, enjoy our conversation and feel free to continue the conversation in the comment section. But for now, I've got to deal with that accent, because with the greatest respect, that's not an accent that I would normally associate with Seoul in South Korea. So usually I ask people about their journey into photography. I suspect your journey's been a little bit longer. How did that accent arrive in South Korea?
It started in a small country town in Australia, and it started with sort of a burning desire to get out of that small country town, and it ended up in Asia. So I actually did high school in Japan. And then I came back home and then went out to do university in South Korea. So I guess that's how the accent arrived.
Okay, so you studied in Korea and you just never went home?
Yeah, basically. I hadn't planned to stay here, but in the end, things just started falling into place, and one thing led to another, and here we are.
And how long have you been in Korea then?
This is my 16th year now.
Wow.
Yeah.
And obviously, as a location for photography, it's not bad.
It goes okay, you know. We have some beautiful mountains, some beautiful islands, some history, you know, some temples, some palaces and things like that are all sort of within a stone's throw of home. So it could be a lot worse. Yeah.
And what was it that led you to pick up a camera in the first place? Obviously, you're living in a beautiful location photography, but what was it that inspired you to be the one to capture those stories?
It actually started out when I first moved to Japan. I took a bag full of those old disposable cameras. So those sort of one roll of film inside, I think 24 frames or something like that. And whatever expired film that the manufacturers had left over got stuffed into those. And I took probably 20 of those with me to Japan and made a whole lot of rubbish photos that I had to basically explain away to my family when I got home as to what exactly I was trying to show them, you know. And so that's basically led me to buying a bit of a better camera and trying to learn how to use it. And, the desire not to have to explain my photographs to people and to sort of let them do their job.
I mean, I think most of our photography careers started with showing people photographs and trying to explain as to why they're so terrible and why they ought to bear with us as we get better.
Definitely, and it gradually gets better, but I don't think it ever really gets to a point where where it's going to be perfect, you know.
But isn't that the thing about photography that I don't know about you, but something that I often experience is, it's always about the chapters. You reach a chapter where you think, okay, I've got it. I've got my style. I've got my techniques. And then you see a photograph, usually by some 16 or 17 or 18-year-old photographer that's just picked up a camera for the first time, and they get something and you think, I'm going all the way back to the beginning, because that's the thing that I love about photography is every time you think we've just got it, we're just mastering it, photography has a way of bringing you back down to earth and saying, no, you've got more, you've always got more to learn.
Yeah, I mean, the internet is definitely a humbling place. But I think that's the great thing about photography. As we grow as people, as our own interests change, our own capabilities change, as cameras change, I think that, our photography evolves with that. And I think if you ever stop learning, it's probably time to put the camera down and maybe, choose something else to do. But I think for all of us, if you open up your old hard drives and start taking a look at the for want of a better word, the rubbish that you shot years ago, it'll definitely give you a kick and say, keep doing this, keep trying to get better at this, keep learning, keep exploring.
100%, and I think it's absolutely. I often look back at some of my photographs, especially when I first said, okay, this is the path I want to follow, and it is indeed a humbling experience, because I can safely say that many of my early photographs were simply terrible. But that's the point, is at the time there was something, it's that spark there, and that's what leads us to enjoy this passion for photography. Now,
absolutely, yeah.
I know you have something of a history with Fujifilm cameras. What was it that led you into the Fujifilm system?
I guess they call it the gateway drug, the X100. I bought
every time.
So I actually bought a secondhand X100S, and I started, I was enjoying it. It was a bit of a clunky, slower machine back then. They were it's the beginnings of mirrorless cameras. They weren't quite up to the standard of their ancestors.
I mean, if we're honest, those first X100s, two things: they were beautiful. And let's be honest, it's the look of it which attracted many of us to that first Fujifilm in the first instance. But looking back, there were some issues with how they worked. There were some issues with some of the menu options.
I think that's part and parcel for if you take a company that's been manufacturing film for years and say, well, you're now going to manufacture the most high-tech cameras on the market. There's going to be a few teething issues. And firmware can always fix a few things, and they definitely came a long way, I think, throughout that development. So the X100S, I think, for me, it was all about just really enjoying not having to focus on this it was just this technological beast that you had in the hand. At the time, I was working with the Nikon D800s, and those were just, they're a brick. They're heavy. They're big. They're amazing cameras. But I needed something to kind of enjoy myself, and that X100S was the tool that kind of did it for me. And then from there, it spiraled out of control. I fell in love with the colors and working with an EVF and just the new technologies that were coming around with mirrorless cameras. And so I went from there to an XT1, to an XT2, to an XT3, to an XT4, and it sort of spiraled out of control a little bit. So.
And each time you found a way of justifying why exactly you needed to go from the XT2 to the XT3 and to the XT4 and so on, because of course it's essential, because that's the thing, is they're just beautiful cameras to use, and I think that it's the experience of shooting the photographs as much as the photographs themselves. Something that I know we share is to me, I always like sharing the story behind it, and quite often I will write the story of the experience of capturing that photograph. So actually, I've always done quite a lot of writing, and I know that you've done quite a lot of writing yourself. You have published many articles on popular websites like Fuji Love, like F-Stoppers. You've published your own books, beautiful books. Is writing and telling the story behind the experience of the shot, is that as much a part of your creative process? Where does the writing fit in?
It very much is. A good friend of mine actually said to me one day, he said, "I'm not really sure if you're a photographer anymore," just because I was doing so much sort of writing and so much storytelling with everything that I was putting into the world. And I think I sort of agree with that. I think for me, photography is a lot about trying to tell stories, to I guess leave a bit of a legacy for the things that you're photographing, whether that be people or places or anything like that, and being able to share that with other people. And I don't, they say that a photograph will write 1,000 words or whatever the little phrase is that goes around. But I think that if you can add to that and share the experience of capturing it, share the experience of being in that place, not only does the photograph sort of evoke those things, but you're able to give it a little bit more, make it go a little bit deeper, I think.
100%, and I think that's a perfect cue to bring in some of the photographs and see exactly what it is that that we're talking about. But just before we do, let's give a shout out to some of the people that are joining us. Absolutely, it is a late night, and so we thank you, Dylan, for that. And regular, we have Robin. Welcome back, Robin, and everybody else. Please do share your questions, and I'm sure there will be plenty after we see some of Dylan's fabulous photography. So let's bring in some photographs to share, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your thought process behind capturing these photographs. So where are we? Where are we at the moment for this?
This is a little town in South Korea called Suncheon. They're very famous for making Korea's traditional fermented sauces. And so it's a little bit different from other regions in Korea in the sense that this is a skill that's been passed down through the matrilineal line. So men were never involved in this. They would go out and do the farming, and mothers would pass on to daughters or daughter-in-laws how to make these sauces. And so the pots that you see in the foreground here are actually these big earthen pots, and they drop all the ingredients in there and leave them for months at a time to sort of ferment and make these Korean sauces. And I got sent down there by an in-flight magazine to try and capture a few images to go with a story that had been written. And the moment I got down there, I realized that this is it's become a bit of a tourist attraction, and I didn't want it to kind of look like that. I didn't want it to be the cooking classes that these ladies run for people to sort of supplement their incomes and things like that. I wanted to make sort of a representative sort of, I guess, a very dramatic, but a very, what they call in Korea, they call a life portrait. So it's sort of the story of your life in one image that will, a bit of a legacy type of thing. And I wanted to create that sort of an image. And so when I met this lady, she actually said, put your cameras away. We're not doing that right now. I want you to come in and taste all of my sauces. And so went in, and she'd made a few different dishes and things that she allows people to sample. And she said, okay, we're going to sit down, we're going to talk, you're going to learn about each other, and then maybe we'll do something. And by the end of the conversation, I'd convinced her that she had to get up at about 6 o'clock the following morning, meet me in her front yard fully dressed, because that was the time we were going to make the portrait that I wanted to get.
And so this wasn't was this portrait arranged as in when you were going down to see her, you were arranged to capture a portrait with her? This wasn't somebody that you just met along the way?
So she was actually interviewed for the article. And I was given a contact for the village head who put me in touch with her. I gave her a call and said, hey, can I come and visit you, if you're not too busy? And she said, yeah, it's not a problem. I'll be, free at 4 p.m. or whatever. And so I went in to meet her then. And and that's sort of how it started. So this is a commissioned portrait, but I took it a little bit further than I think what we were initially setting out to get.
But isn't that one of the secrets behind capturing a portrait like this, that you have to build that relationship first? So absolutely, you had to go in, you had to taste these flavors, you had to listen to the story, because obviously she's entrusting you to tell the story that she wants to share. And so until you understand that, and until she has the confidence that you understand that, how are you going to get that natural emotion as opposed to the stiff and contrived pose that you would get otherwise?
Absolutely. And you're never going to get more than a couple of minutes with somebody, even if you get a couple of minutes, unless you've built that sort of rapport with them. And, this is just one image from the set that I shot, but I have a whole lot where she's, scooping the sauces out or preparing little bits of food. And once we heard the story about the mothers passing down to daughters, I said, oh, is your mother or your daughter still around? And she said, absolutely. My mother lives next door. And I said, well, is there a chance we could get her over and do a portrait together? She said, absolutely. Let me see if I can get her over there. And, sure enough, an hour later, her rather elderly mother hobbled over, and she dressed herself up in the traditional Korean costume, the hanbok as well, just to make a portrait for somebody she'd never met. So I think definitely building that rapport opens the doors not only for the
Hmm.
photograph, but for
Hmm.
those personal experiences that you can get,
Hmm.
you know? Hmm.
And you mentioned before about legacy,
Hmm.
and I feel like one of the things that strikes me when I look at your work is this
Hmm.
idea of legacy, that some of this is about capturing not just a moment in time, but a feeling in time. So this is a
Hmm.
traditional. Obviously, you have her in traditional dress, and it's a very traditional scene. If I was to look at this, I wouldn't know whether that's taken last year, in the 1980s, in the 1970s, in the 1950s.
Hmm.
And I love that timeless quality about a photograph like this. That it's going to capture that emotion of that time frame. And that's something I see throughout your photographs. If we have a look at, I mean, an image like this, it speaks for itself.
Yeah, this is actually from a personal project of mine. So this is the cover of the book that you mentioned earlier, the self-published book that I made. Um, so I've been working for a few years now on capturing the last tattooed faces of Asia, and so this was one of the very first portraits that I ever made for that series, and it's one that I'm still absolutely in love with. Made
Hmm.
with an older camera, not the technology that we have now, but still, definitely, as you said, a bit of a legacy. I mean, throughout this project, a lot of the people that I've photographed are no longer with us, and so I've got these portraits that are almost, a legacy in and of their own. Which, it's a great feeling at the end of the day to know that you have, one of the last portraits of one of these people, and it's such a beautiful representation of who they were.
And this is simply a stunning portrait. And I particularly I like that her eyes are closed. Um, to me, it adds something to the solemn nature of the photograph. But it must be it must be something where they give you a lot of trust to take a photograph like this, because it is there is a danger of tourist type photographs
Mhm.
of this feeling of why are these portraits being captured. So
Mhm.
what I'm particularly interested in is how close that you have got with your subjects, that clearly there is a rapport there, and there's a trust to allow you to capture a very vulnerable photograph like this.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that you've got to work towards. I mean, you can find these ladies are quite famous, at least from a couple of the villages in the area are quite famous, and you will see a lot of photos of them online. But you often see sort of a very similar thing. They know that some of the tourists want them to come and stand in front of the beautiful colors they have hanging up in their village and things like that. But to actually get a little bit deeper, I mean, some of the things that I do is I actually lived with them. So I wasn't visiting for a day. This is actually in Myanmar, and it's out of the area that tourists are allowed to stay. So before all of this difficulty hit Myanmar now, most of the country was open for tourism, but some of the more remote areas were still closed, and it was military access only. But with a little bit of work and a little bit of pushing, you can get permission, or at least you could. And I managed to get permission to go with a couple of police officers, a couple of military officers, and tour guides and things like that, translators. And we all went as this massive crew, and we stayed in the villages. And so, what we would do in order to sort of get these people to know us a little bit is we would set up camp in a house and invite everybody in for for a cup of tea, sit down and say hello to them. Or we would visit them, cameras in bags, everything away, and we just visit, chat, learn a little bit about them. And once you've done that, once you've sort of shown that you're a human, I think, then people are willing to sort of. It's the same in every interaction in our lives. If we speak to each other on the same level and nobody's above anybody else or nobody's trying to take anything from anybody else, then I think you can really get access to some pretty amazing things. And I mean, with a portrait like this, it's obviously strobe light, so I'm setting up a light stand and making light tests, and you need patience for that sort of thing. Not everybody's willing to give you that amount of time. And like you said, to have a lady close her eyes like this is
Yeah.
she has no idea what you're going to do.
Yeah. And I think, as I said, that to me that adds to the vulnerability. But a point that that certainly I've discovered in my own work. You perhaps you share if you had a similar experience. There is something which isn't often discussed about these kind of portraits, is people actually like having their photograph taken. Something that people often ask me is it difficult to photograph strangers? And the reality is actually no, because people do like having their photograph taken. The key thing is they don't want to have their photograph taken by a weirdo. They want to know why that photograph is being taken. And if there is a valid reason, and if the photograph is something which they feel is going to share something of themselves, then actually they enjoy having their photograph taken. But you've got to make sure. So the issue is not about persuading someone to have their photograph taken, because most people actually quite enjoy that process. The actual task is to allow somebody to trust you to take the photograph. And I think that's something that strikes me with your portraits, is that there's clearly this element of trust, which is a word that I found myself thinking about a lot when I was looking at your work. Is there's a clear rapport and a clear element of trust amongst the you and your subject. I mean, we have another example of a beautiful portrait, but it's not a portrait that is easily come by.
No, this one took us a couple of days actually to gain the amount of trust required to do this. He was very willing to have his portrait made, but he didn't want to do it unless his wife was at home, because she knew how to dress him to make everything perfect for him. We had no clue, obviously, how to do that, and he was willing to do it, but he needed her. When she came home the first time, she was too tired. She didn't want to do it, so we said, okay, no worries. What is a good time for you? And they offered for us to come back, and I think it was 5:30 the following morning. And so we came back in, and
listen, Dylan, that's nothing for you. I got you to do a live stream at 2 a.m. in the morning. So
yeah, that's right. That's right. No, I'm used to this. I mean, old men call me into their houses at random hours all the time. Yeah, and so I mean,
that's a story for a different live stream. Let's get back to the photography.
Yeah, wrong choice of words. It is 2 a.m. though. Yeah,
but
building that rapport was that,
I mean, a stunning photograph, and I particularly, one of the things that I really like about this, obviously, apart from the scene setting and the way that the shot is actually captured, the elements of the shot, it's the angle. I find this angle an interesting one, because it's not necessarily an obvious choice. Many photographers might well stand above the subject, or shoot in a different way. I found the angle of this one interesting. Where was the choices there?
So this man, he's actually quite a revered gentleman in his traditional culture. He's a shaman for the Apatani people, and so if anybody is sick, or if there's some sort of ailment in the village, traditionally he would be called upon to convene with the spirits, decide what was causing this sort of harm and what needed to be done to kind of solve that. And so when I considered how I wanted to make a portrait, I sort of wanted to give him that larger than life kind of feel. And I think there's a couple of ways you can do that. I mean, you can light somebody in a pretty amazing way, but what I really wanted to do was sort of just describe him. So I chose to use a very wide angle lens. This is the GFX 50S with the 23mm f4. So we're looking at, what's that on APS-C? That's ridiculously wide. It's about a 12mm, I think.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very wide lens, and I'm very, very close to him. And if you can get down low, you can sort of give somebody a bit of an epic kind of a feeling. You can make them feel a bit larger than they actually are, like you're sort of looking up at them rather than looking down at them. And I think it's a subtle thing that you can do, but by using, people ask me, what's a portrait lens? The lens that you have on your camera is a portrait lens. I mean, there's no stopping you from making a portrait with any kind of lens. So So the 23mm is a good choice here because it extends his arms out. It makes him look a little bit larger than he actually is, you know. And I'm still able to get really, really close to him, keep him quite large in the frame, but include a lot of that background, and still crop out his television because this is very, very much the modern world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, something that I find interesting is we talked at the start of our conversation. We were talking about how every time we think that we're getting close to having a handle on this photography business, that suddenly something will happen and it will change our way of thinking about it. And one of those that I've certainly been through, and I'm sure you've been the same experience, is the first time that you realize you got the wrong lens on the camera. The what supposed wrong lens. You're about to take a portrait and you've got your wide angle instead of your tele lens on, and so you look and you think, oh, well, hang on a second, this actually kind of works. And suddenly you're looking at all of those portraits you've shot over the past few years with your 85mm equivalent, and you're thinking they would have been great if they had been at a 16mm equivalent or something. And suddenly it opens up a whole new world. And something that I do encourage people to do is to not get stuck in this idea that 85mm, that's for portraits, your 16mm, that's for landscape, your 35mm is for street. No,
They're all lenses.
Right, Lisa? They're all lenses. And and they can all be used in fascinating and interesting ways. And I wonder about a portrait like this, because it's if we didn't have the wide angle there, so we couldn't see the whole scene, if we'd got up closer, so it wouldn't have told the same story.
No, definitely not. I think the further back you get, the sort of the less personal a portrait becomes. So if you go from, say, this 23mm out to, say, the 63mm, you get a very, very different, that physical space between you and the subject comes across. And I think that, you know, the 85mm equivalent, the so-called portrait lens, is a very flattering way to shoot people. It's a great way to make a very pretty photograph of a bride, but I think it's not a very interesting way to photograph somebody who is as interesting as this man is.
And interesting, I think, is a great description. I think I'm interested in something. I'm interested in picking up is you mentioned that the tattooed, the capturing the portraits of the tattooed people was a personal project. And I don't think we've touched the range of photography which you engage in, but it's fair to say that you are engaged in a wide variety, from family portraits to commercial to street photography. So perhaps telling stories is more what you do rather than specifically one style. But I want to pick up on this idea of personal projects and the importance of personal projects to keep us on our toes, as it were, as photographers. And clearly your personal projects are not just, okay, I'm going to take a photograph every day for the next 30 days. They're a bit more engaged than that. Where do you see the importance of personal projects in photography?
For me, I mean, I do this for a living as well. So this is my profession, but it's also my hobby in a sense. It started as a hobby, it moved into a profession. And I think the personal projects is a good way to basically reset, I think, for me. It's to do photography not to a brief or not for somebody else. It's to do photography just to fill the soul a little bit. And I think that that's where it really comes in, at least for me. Of course, there's the usual things. You can mess around with new techniques with no pressure and things like that. But it gives you a chance to just express yourself, show who you are, dig a little bit deeper in yourself, and not be satisfying a client, but sort of satisfying your soul as such. And I think that's where personal projects fit in for me.
I really like that description of satisfying your soul, because, you know, the thing is, we pick up, creative people pick up a camera, or they pick up a paintbrush, or they pick up a pen, or they sing a song, or they play a musical instrument, because there's a creative drive within them that I feel like almost needs to be released, needs to be expelled, and And I think that the personal projects are that opportunity to express our soul, rather than say the specific of a commercial project brief or whatever. So I something that I've discovered in my own work is how important it is to still engage in those personal projects and to find the time. I think one of the things that this current crisis that we're all facing has given us is the time to look at personal projects, because if we're honest, many of us that are full-time professional photographers, this crisis has certainly given us a time, because there's not so many commissioned projects going around. Right. So we're finding the time, but I think it's actually a great way to, as you said, reset. And I think, you know, the thing that strikes me is exactly as Robin says here, inspire so much curiosity. And that's the thing that for me sums up a lot of my experiences of looking at your photographs, is that curiosity. Because when I'm looking at some of these portraits, if I bring in another of your portraits, it inspires curiosity. I want to know about who this is. I want to know about his life. But then I don't want to know at the same time. I like the idea that I've got part of the story through the photograph, but I haven't got the whole story. So it's that curiosity thing which really strikes me. Where are we with this?
No, thank you for that comment, Robin. That's sort of, I think curiosity is a big part of what drives me to make photographs. I think I'm naturally a bit of an introverted person. I won't go out to meet people unless I really have to. You know, if it's for work or something like that. I don't go out and just, you know, have coffee with people I don't know. It doesn't really happen. But if I have a camera in my hand, it's sort of a license to care, a license to be curious, a license to bare my soul a little bit, not worrying about how it's going to reflect on me, but just learn something about my subjects. And I hope that, I mean, it seems that at least for one person, it's come across that I'm curious, and hopefully that makes you curious as well. So
I'm interested in the techniques behind this, because what this strikes me, clearly I'm looking at an image like this, and of course, I'm sure you do the same thing. I'm looking at this and thinking, how would I have shot that photograph? How would I replicate this? And so to me, I'm going to guess how you took this photograph. For me, I'm seeing that you've got obviously an off-camera flash. So
yes.
I'm actually seeing, personally, I'm seeing one decent light source, and I don't think there's no background behind that. I suspect that what you're doing is you're using your shutter speed maybe to take the ambient light out, get rid of the background as much as possible. Then you're filling the light with artificial light through your flash, and then maybe some post-production to take out a few of the shadows in the background that you can still see. Am I near the mark?
You're pretty close, yeah. So there are times when a lot of these photographs, because I do a lot of these sort of black background just to focus on the tattoos themselves, I do try to get as dark a background as possible. But it's not always possible in some of these huts in the mountains and things that are, you know, made with straw or made with wooden palings and things like that. You have gaps between them, and so I do actually keep a small piece of black cloth in my bag as well, that I can just dangle behind if I need to block anything like that. But for the most part, you're right. I'm using my shutter speed to essentially destroy the ambient light, get rid of it from my exposure. So I'm just making a black frame, and then in this case, adding a softbox from the left-hand side of the camera. And then there's actually, if you look at the left-hand side of his face or the right-hand side of the image, there's actually another light just skimming the side of his face there, and that's I think it's a $50 speed light. It's a Godox, one of those tiny little ones that runs on 2 AA batteries. So yeah, and that's just, you know, that's all things you can put in your 2 back pockets basically, and be able to make a portrait like this.
100%, and I think that's something that I a tip that people can take away from this. Something so simple, just have a little bit of black cloth. You just fold it up, just tuck it away in the camera bag somewhere, and literally you can just, obviously I don't know how you've done this, but you can just tie it to something, have some people holding it, but it's amazing what you can do with just a little bit of creativity, and something that I learned the hard way is you don't need room fulls of equipment to achieve the results. What you need is the creativity and the imagination and the practice to do it. And certainly as the years have gone on, my kit has reduced in size, and yet I'm getting better results or more pleasing results for me than I did when I had a room full of equipment.
That's right, and that just comes down to experience and desire not to have any back pain, you know.
there is that.
Yeah.
Okay, and a last one of this series, but I love this photograph. Talk me through it. Let's hear your thoughts rather than my thoughts on it.
So this is actually photographed. I help a good friend of mine, Etienne from Pics of Asia, down in Vietnam, to run photo tours throughout central Vietnam. And what we try to, this actually links back to the previous image quite well, in the sense that we try to work with very little to create a lot. So this is very simply, I left the hotel that morning at about 4 o'clock with my XH1 and a 23mm lens. That's all I had, nothing else. Maybe a strap to keep it out of the water. We were going to a wet market. And what had happened is I was noticing, you know, these silhouettes against the sun, and I thought, oh, that's really good, but I need something to make this a little more interesting. And so I saw a section of this market where they were actually shaving ice, and a lot of it was starting to melt. You know, Vietnam's a tropical country, and so it was creating this tiny little pool. And this may be about a meter across, this pool. And so what I did was I took the strap off the camera. I put the camera down in this fishy, stinky water, right in it, so that I could get right on the level of the water and create that perfect reflection. And then it was a case of what I call it doing the dance, which is basically you're moving backwards and forwards, trying to make sure that the silhouettes aren't overlapping each other, waiting for, you know, one person to move, walk out, walk in. And I might have shot 20 or 30 images here, I think, trying to get the exact one that I wanted. In the end, there's still a couple of things I would fix, but, you know, I was supposed to be running a tour, so I had to give up and let the participants have a go, you know.
I mean, two things that I take from that. The first thing is I actually wrote that down doing the dance, because I am 100% going to steal that. And the other thing is actually one of the things that I do encourage people to do. Is the beauty of these modern digital cameras is we can shoot 1,000 shots, as opposed to the old film days where we were limited. We had to be so much more conservative because we were limited to the shots we had on the film. And I often encourage people to slow down, to take the time to compose the shot. In fact, a common thing that I tell people is to look twice and shoot once, encouraging people to slow down. But I'm going to contradict myself here, because sometimes there is that moment, such as a photograph like this, where there's a lot happening. You use the ability of the digital camera, use the fact that you can capture those 1,000 photographs and shoot, because sometimes there is a place for it. And especially with these natural moments and in these situations where the light is changing quickly, where you've got to readjust quickly, use that. And so I absolutely can see this idea of shooting a whole series looking for that one where all of the elements come together. I'm not sure I'm so in favor of the idea of getting my camera into the stinky melting water and thing, but you know, you do what you've got to do.
Right.
But I love the subtle nature, again, that word subtle, and I love the minimalist approach. It's actually a busy scene but done in a minimal way, and I think that's stunning.
Yeah, I think that's what photography is. I mean, it's the art of composition is literally the art of removing things. Basically, take out everything you don't need, get it as simple as possible, while still being able to show what you want to show. So start from a long way back and move in. Basically, is what I like to do. Yeah.
And I mean, it's and the results are stunning. And I think we've talked about the contrast of styles, because we're going to go to a different to finish out. We have a couple of images of a very different style, and yet we've still got this same idea of trust. That's the thing that strikes me when I look at this portrait, because a very different subject matter and a very different feel to the photograph, and yet obviously it's still a moment of trust, because clearly we've got the subject and that close bond between the subjects here who are letting you in. So tell me about this photograph.
So this is again, I mean, I think with adults you can kind of fob your way through trust. You can, I guess, not fake it, but you can definitely build it as you go along. But I think with children, if they don't trust you in the beginning, it's going to be a while before you gain their trust. And so you've really
they
got
will
to
call
be,
you on it.
they call you on it, and you've got to be honest. And especially with situations like this, I work a lot with adoptive parents, and so I'm doing a family portrait session possibly 48 hours after they've taken custody of a new child.
Wow.
And
Okay,
so
suddenly that adds a whole different element to a shot like this.
it's not an easy thing to do,
Yeah.
and you really need to be able to gain that trust very, very quickly. Or be able to stay back far enough back that somebody's not going to be threatened by you, and from there slowly be able to build to the point where something like this, I can go in with a 23mm lens and be literally breathing on people as I make their pictures.
Now let's back up a little. 23mm on which system? On the medium
This
format
is on
or
the
on
X system. This is
okay.
This is,
Okay, so we're about a 35mm
about a 35,
equivalent.
yep.
Yeah.
And so still
suddenly
quite wide, and still you have to be very close to be able
Yeah.
to crop in like this. So you're centimeters away from people at this point.
And again, that adds another dimension, because if looking at and I've looked at this photograph a couple of times already, and I hadn't clocked it. I hadn't clocked that this wasn't a mother and father with their child. That clearly this child is 18 months old, something like that, and from a photograph like that, that looks like a child who has grown up with these people, and to capture that kind of emotion after a relatively short period of time, that's incredible, and it adds another dimension to the photograph.
Yeah, and I mean it has to be real. You can't create something like this and have it be fake with children. They just, like I said, they call you on your BS. They don't allow you to fake it. You have to be honest with them. And so with something like this is a genuine moment. This is us having a great time and me capturing it, And with things like this, often the composition's a bit wonky. If you look at the lines in the background there, it's getting pretty close to a 20-degree angle, It's not what's going to win any awards for composition or anything like that, but it's got the moment. It has everything that it needs to have, and it's telling that story that it needs to tell,
And I defy anybody to notice that the background is at a slight angle when you're faced with a smile like this.
Exactly, and that's the point. Is the moment overrides that, Yeah.
For sure. Anybody that does notice that either needs to get out a little bit more, or they're a photographer, one or the other.
Which probably needs to get out a little more.
Who probably needs to get out a little bit more, yeah. And we have one last one to finish.
Similar idea. So again, this is about 24 hours after adoption, and this one took a little bit more time to get to. We spent the first half of the session with me being quite a ways back from people, and gradually getting closer and closer. And once he was comfortable with his parents and his big brother, then it was time for me to start coming in. And eventually, he started to find my jokes kind of funny. It wasn't, the 100th time, and I managed to get through to him. And so we got these beautiful little smiles to finish up the session,
Incredible. And again, I think this is a photograph that anybody would treasure, especially when it's a family portrait. Anybody would treasure this. But with the story behind it, I think it adds to it. These are incredibly moving photographs, and I think that it's the thing that strikes me is the approach, to capturing the very honest nature of these shots, and so the thing that I take away from the photographs of yours that we've looked at is definitely this element of trust, and the thing that I'd encourage photographers out there that are engaged in portrait photography or dabbling in shooting photographs of people in this way is to focus on building that trust, because as you can see, these results are are stunning. And I think that when we talk about legacy, these are the photographs that child will be looking at for some years to come.
And that's exactly right. And it's the reason that I do it is just to be able to give a child some happy memories to look back on and say, you know what, this was a good time in my life as well. You know, adoption's not always an easy thing. And so, yeah, definitely to be able to add that to the collection of memories that they have as they grow older is well and truly worth it. And it's, you know, it's good to have a job where basically I get to make people happy, and you know, what I do for a living, you know.
Yeah. And now, listen, we've mentioned that that you've worked with the X series cameras. You've mentioned that you've worked with the medium format GFX range. Any favorites?
Oh, I think it's every new camera that you get. I mean, we talked before about these new toys, you know, and I think every camera that you get gives you a new spark. You want to go out and create pictures with it just because you've got a new toy, you know. My current toy is the GFX 100S, which is filling up my memory cards and hard drives like a madman, but it's a lot of fun to work with, you know. That's yeah, but I'd say that if I had to take one, you know, everybody's desert island camera is the X100, you know. I have the black one as well. So that's the camera that's always with me, you know.
100%. That for me also, that's the camera that's always with me all of the time. And you know, I was discussing with somebody recently because the reality is that with a smartphone in your pocket, everybody is a photographer. But everybody can be a photographer, but not everybody can capture the moment in the same way. And something they asked me, why do I carry a camera around with me everywhere? And I literally do carry the X100 around with me everywhere. And the reality is that the phone cameras are tremendous. And when I think back to where they first started, I remember the first time I saw one was probably, that must have been about 98. I saw a phone camera,
the old Nokias something with
like their, this was actually the Sony Ericsson with a little plug-in at the bottom, and you know, you're talking about quarter VGA resolution, and so they've come such a long way, but they're nowhere near a dedicated camera yet. Maybe in the future, but right now the dedicated camera will always capture that emotion. And that sentiment greater. Yeah,
there's something to be said for the professional tool and its ability to just meld into your hand and do what you tell it to immediately, you know, which I think is something that you don't get from a phone camera, as wonderful as they are. Yeah.
Now we one more question. Mentioned that you've done you'd mentioned you've done a lot of commercial work before, and now you're doing family portraits. What's your preferred type of photography? And if you could choose to do what you truly love, what would you be shooting?
If I could choose to do what I truly love to make a living, I think it would definitely be the family photography. But I think I'm a bit of a scatterbrained human being, so I do love to keep in bits and pieces of everything else as well. And I still do quite a bit of commercial photography. It's actually what got me through the pandemic was a few big commercial jobs, because those are still happening, even though families don't really want to bring their kids out and risk health issues and things like that. The commercial world has to keep going, you know? And so that's a ball that can't be stopped, basically. And so I still do a little bit of that, and I still enjoy it. But I think anything that I can put my spin on, put my emotion into, anything I can put my heart into is something that I love to shoot. Making photographs is, I don't stop. I know, Paul, you don't either. So.
And I have no intention of. So listen. It's been tremendous talking to you. I want to finish off with one thing. It's been a tricky year or so, especially for those of us that traditionally traveled quite a bit, and you know, our work takes us to different places. What's the immediate future hold for you? Have you got anything that you're excited and looking forward to?
At the moment, I'm actually sitting down, and we talked about this idea of personal work. I'm actually sitting down and collating all of the work that I've done for my Tattoos of Asia project. And so that's basically starting to take shape as a book at this point. So while I haven't been able to travel, I've been able to relive those things. and it's given me a purpose while there's not so much work or the ability to move around and everything like that. So at this point, it's focusing on actually looking at all the things that I've shot over the years.
And I think that that's something that I encourage a lot of all photographers to do, is to take that time and go back and look. And it's a fascinating thing when we can bring back the work that we've done over the years. Something that I think that a question I get asked quite a lot is how to develop personal style. How do you know what your personal style is? And the reality is, I think it's a question you don't need to ask. Your personal style will arrive. You will find your personal style through its own course. If you simply look at the photographs which you like and look at the photographs that you take which appeal to you, you will see what your style is. And I think that we don't always take the time to go back and pull those stories together through the photographs. And I mean, you've got some beautiful stories to share through those photographs, and I think that I'm very interested to see what comes out of that. I've been having a quick look through your beautiful book, and I'd be very keen to see what's to come.
Yeah, the second one is on its way, and I think you've made a very good point there. In that, one of the things that I say to people when people ask me, how do I develop my style or whatever, I said, well, don't photograph things you don't have an interest in.
Yeah,
and that's basically it. If you want to have a style, then photograph the things that you're interested in and do it in the way that you like. Don't try and copy anything. Don't try to define your style. Just go out and do it. Make pictures. I think that's the way to do it. And over time, that's become a pretty large project for me, which will hopefully become a book by next year. But I think that wasn't the initial goal. The initial goal was just to go out and make photographs of the things that I love.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think if there's one piece of advice to give all aspiring photographs and photographers, is simply go and make photographs. You can read, you can study, you can do it. Eventually, you just go out and make photographs. Anyway,
as many as
Dylan,
possible.
It's been fascinating to talk to you, and especially fascinating to hear about life in South Korea at nearly 3 o'clock in the morning. So I particularly appreciate that effort.
Not at all. Thanks for having me.
do make sure you go and have a look at Dylan's work. Where can they find you on social media?
I am at Dylan Goldby Photographer. I'm on dylangoldby.com. I'm Dylan Goldby Photographer on Facebook. Welkin Light is my business stuff if you're interested in the family side of things. Those links all, if you go to one of them, find me somewhere. I'm the only Dylan Goldby in the world, so you'll find me.
So a search engine will be your friend, and believe me, if you do search out the work, you will be richly rewarded. Well, Dylan, thank you so much for sharing some of your tips and your tricks with us. It's been a delight to chat to you.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Okay, thank you. And for all of you watching along, thank you again for sharing these in our chats with these wonderful photographers. We have one more left in the series. Next week, we are going back to our roots, and we're going back to discuss photography in South Africa with a wonderful South African photographer. So until next week, thank you very much, and I will see you all soon.